All right, it's podcast time, special edition here on Taking Vegas. I am Chris Hodge. It is Monday morning. We have the CFP recap. They got it right. They got it wrong. That's the way I feel. I'm going to give you my reasons. Now, we're only going to speak facts. No, I don't have a dog in the race. All right? I don't root for one of the teams or the other. I'm not a fan of one of the teams. So I don't have a dog in the race. Or I don't have a horse in the race. I don't have one. I'm just going to tell you, these are facts. I have no problem with the overall selection. Michigan won. Okay. We're gonna go over that. Washington 2, Texas 3, Bama 4. I heard a lot of it's unfair. Okay, so let's tackle unfair first, right? Because we have a 13-0 team, Florida State, that got left out. Okay, well, we'll go with unfair. Let's go with that argument. If you're going to say unfair, though, you have to apply it to everyone. Again, I don't root for one of these teams. I root for who we need to win when we gamble on the damn games. That's it. Let's start with unfair. Penn State. Penn State lost 2 games this year. They lost to Ohio State. They lost to Michigan. They were competitive in both games. They beat the team that played in the Big Ten title game by 31. They beat Iowa 31-0. Iowa got to play in the Big Ten title game. You haven't even heard of Penn State being mentioned in any national conversation. What did they do wrong? They had the bad fortune of having to play Ohio State and Michigan, and again, competitive in both games. 10-2, don't even talk to them, didn't even get to represent in the Big Ten title game because of the way that was set up. Iowa got to go play where their point total for the first and second half was 0.5. That's how bad Iowa is. Unfair. Penn State doesn't even get mentioned. What did they do wrong other than having to play Michigan and Ohio State? Let's move on. Ole Miss. Ole Miss has 2 losses this year. You know who those came against? Georgia and Alabama. So, not even mentioned on a national landscape. All right? But because Ole Miss had to play Georgia and Alabama, they lose 2 games, not even spoken about. Ohio State, 1 loss this year. 1 loss. On the road to the number 1 ranked team in the CFP. Okay? What did they do in a competitive game? That was a 3-point game before the field goal that made it 6, and they're driving down the field. They had a shot to go to Ann Arbor and win the game. That's Ohio State's 1 loss. Michigan. Georgia. Their 1 loss in 3 years. The only team to have beaten this team in 3 full seasons is Alabama. No one else has beaten Georgia. No one. Alabama beat them in the SEC title game in 2021 before losing the national title. Georgia goes undefeated last year. Now, I know it's not based on what teams did last year. I get that. All right? But they've lost 1 game. They lost to number 4. If you want to look at it like this, what 1-loss team had the better loss? Texas, who's deserving. I'm not getting on Texas. I'm really not, okay? I said earlier, they got it right, they got it wrong. I'm not getting on Texas, okay? But whose 1 loss is better? Let's be honest. Texas to Oklahoma, hard-fought game. Georgia to Bama, hard-fought game. Both on neutral sites. Okay? To me, Georgia had the better loss. So, when you look at it from the perspective of unfair, there's a lot of teams that had it unfair. A lot of teams. Let's look at Oregon. Oregon beats every team they play, except they lose by a total of 6 points in 2 games to the number 2 ranked team in the country. On the road, they lose to Washington by 3 in a game. If they get a first down, they win the game, and they just lose by 3 in the Pac-12 championship. Out. No shot. Because what? They had to play number 2. So here's my thing about 13-0. 13-0 is great. No, I'm not saying it's not. I'm really not, okay? But at some point, who you play has to come into the equation. Okay, so now we've been over unfair. Now let's look at the logistics of what they did. All right. Let's go with the top 12 teams in the CFP rankings. Every single one of those 12 teams played against each other in some way, shape, or form. What I mean by that is, Michigan played Ohio State, who ended up at number 7. Texas played Alabama, 3-4. Penn State had to play Ohio State and Michigan. So if you look at the top 12 teams, they all had to play at least one team that was ranked in the top 12, except for one team. And you know who that one team was? Florida State. Florida State did not have to play any single game against a team that was ranked in the top 12 of the CFP. Who did they play? They played number 13, LSU. They won the game, first game of the season. Great job. Nice win. But if you look at it from the standpoint of Alabama had to play number 3, Texas. This final CFP rankings. Number 3, Texas. Number 6, Georgia. Number 11, Ole Miss. Number 13, LSU. They had to play 4 games in the top 13. So even if you want to expand it, you want to expand it to 13. Florida State had to play 1 game in the top 13. Bama had to play 4. Bama had the misfortune of losing to number 3. Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, before I go any further, to possibly infuriate people or and this is not SEC bias. It's not, okay? I said it when I did the podcast last week. If Alabama had upset Georgia, which they did, and everything else stayed the way it was, my 4 would have been Michigan, winner of Pac-12 title, so Washington, okay? I would have put Alabama in at 3, and I would have made Georgia 4. Now, why do you leave Texas out? Let's talk about that. And again, I have no problem with Texas getting in. I'm just giving you my 4. Because you're not leaving the SEC champion out. Alabama went and beat Georgia. Alabama played the number 6 or 7th ranked schedule in the country, okay? Yes, Texas has the head-to-head, great, but at that point, I don't think you're debating anymore Bama versus Texas because Bama had beaten Georgia. Now you're debating Georgia versus Texas, if that makes sense. And some of you may not agree with that, and I believe Georgia's body of work and their 1 loss was better than the loss that Texas had, okay? Mind you, that's what I would have done. I have no problem with what the committee did, putting Texas in, because if they don't put Texas in, Texas is sitting there screaming from the rooftops, rightfully so, that we beat Alabama. We beat the SEC title. I said this last week. I stand by it. That is as compelling an argument as you could possibly have. And it's a great argument. Okay, so the committee left Georgia out. But here's the point of it. If Georgia is in, and it's really supposed to get the 4 best teams, even if Georgia is in at number 4, Georgia is the favorite to win the national title. They're the favorite. They are one of the 4 best teams in the country. So now, and they passed the eye test. Why? Because they lost a 3-point game to Alabama in the SEC title game? Forget that. Okay, but that doesn't mean Texas isn't deserving. Now, let's look at Florida State. I don't like the theory they're not the same team. I don't like that excuse. I think that's a poor excuse. All right? They have a great defense. They won the games that were in front of them. They went 13-0. They went undefeated. But to go back to what I said 7 minutes ago, how you get to 13-0 has to matter. Liberty's 13-0. They played the 133rd ranked schedule out of 133 teams. I don't believe they should be in the New Year's 6 over SMU. I don't. I think SMU's a better football team. SMU played a harder schedule. If Liberty played the 2 teams that SMU played, and SMU played the schedule that Liberty played, it's flip-flopped. No doubt in my mind. Okay, so what has to happen, in my opinion, is it has to matter how you get to 13-0. Florida State's best win this year was against LSU. Bama beat them too. Who else did they beat? A down year Clemson team? Duke? Miami? I'm not going to get them on I'm not going to get on them for the Florida game. It's a rivalry game. Alabama, Auburn could go either way. Those rivalry games get tricky. I'm not going to get on them. But when you look at FSU, who did they beat? Their best win was against number 13, who Alabama beat as well. These are just facts. Again, no horse in the race. I'm not a fan of these teams. I root for who I need to bet on and win. That's it. That's all I root for. It's not SEC bias. I believe the SEC had the toughest division this year. Yes, y'all, they're 7-9 versus out of comp. I don't care what Vanderbilt goes and does. I don't care. Okay? Right now, the SEC has 5 of the top 13 ranked teams in the CFP. 5 of the top 13. You can't even argue with how good that conference is. And of all the metrics in the power index, the ACC is number 5 out of the Power 5. So they played the 55th ranked schedule. Their best win is against number 13. If Bama played FSU's schedule, Bama's 13-0. If you just flipped it and had Florida State play Georgia on Saturday and Alabama got to play Louisville, Georgia's beating FSU. Hell, they're minus 14 against them in the bowl game. All right? Now, you don't know who's going to play and what they're going to do, but that's where they are. So how you get to 13-0 has to matter. And 12-1, Bama schedule, 13-0, FSU schedule, Alabama gets in. You can disagree with it all you want. Bama gets in. And I think Georgia has a very strong argument. But if Georgia got in and Texas didn't, I thought Texas had an incredibly strong argument. And if you want to go with one loss, hell, Ohio State lost to Michigan. If they don't have to play Michigan at the end of the season, they go undefeated. So all of that comes into play. These are facts. We got a Monday night game tonight. Podcast coming to an end. Got a Monday night game. Lose a little bit of his luster with the injury, obviously, to Burrow. You know, he's been out now a couple of weeks. But Cincinnati is playing Jacksonville. Like the over in this game. I do believe there's going to be some points in this game. I think Jacksonville will score some points. I think Cincinnati will score some points as well. Over not overly high. It's under 40. So we'll go with the over for free. Hopefully we win that one. And we got some big games lined up for the weekend. So this was a emergency podcast. Lack of a better term. Wanted to get some facts out there. I hope you guys agree. If you disagree, that's fine too. That's what it's all about. That's what makes sports so great. Wrapping up this podcast. Have a great Monday, everyone. We'll be back on Wednesday or Thursday with another podcast. Have a great day, everyone.